Well, today we kick off this 5-week series. I think it's a high potential series. We'll see at the end whether it was a high impact series or not. This is a good series for us because once a year we always group everything together at the church. What we're doing in here will engage adults and teens, but just as we're doing Love Does in this room, the elementary students are doing it, the preschool students are doing it, all the groups are doing it, and that's a really big deal. You also have a chance today to buy the Love Does book. That's written by Bob Goff. It's a New York Times bestseller. I love the subtitle. It says, "Discover a Secretly Incredible Life in an Ordinary World." And if you went on Amazon, it would cost you $13. In the Commons area today, it's $5 because we want everyone to have one. It's 30 short chapters that are easy reads. So make sure you engage with this along the way. People ask me, why is it a big deal that we do this from time to time where we sync the whole church together? And let me tell you why. I think it's really important that at least from time to time, we make room for cross-generational conversations. That whatever's happening in here is also happening with your kids, and you can pick up the theme and walk with it all week long. I think it's a big deal that what's going on the weekend engages our groups because it turns into a little bit of lecture lab where you hear about it here and then you kind of work out how it's really going to work in life in your community group. But maybe the biggest thing today, and this will happen over all 5 weeks, is the chance for us to see the impact of this when we're all focused in the same direction. By the end of today, I'm going to ask you to do 3 very simple things this week. And if we all do them, here's what I know. 4,000 people in our region will be impacted because our church has gone out and everyone's just done 3 very simple things. And if you can stop to imagine how that could multiply over weeks and months and time, we have the chance to literally change the world, or at least change someone's world here today. So we're going to dig into Love Does. Before I begin, I need to kind of get a sense from all of you, maybe a little census or assessment at how well you love. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions. This is going to go very fast. I need your participation by raising your hands. There is one question. This is the question in all of these circumstances. The question is, how well do you love? And then you have 3 potential answers. You can either say, I'm awesome, I'm awful, or I'm average, okay? So I'm going to create about maybe 6 or 7 different categories, different relationships that you have, and I need you to tell me whether you're awesome, whether you're awful, or whether you're average. So the Bible says, husbands, love your wives, right? And then it talks about that in the nature of families and marriages and stuff. So let's just start here. As it relates to you and your spouse, or you and your significant other, how well do you love them? How many of you are awesome? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? All right. Now, if you disagreed with your spouse's assessment and you're sitting next to them, this is a good time for the elbow. Let's move beyond spouses. I want you to think about your parents for a moment. When it comes to your parents, how well do you love them? How many of you are awesome at loving your parents? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? Okay? Let's talk about siblings for a minute. I think this is the most fun group, right? Think about your brothers, your sisters, right? How many of you are awesome at loving your siblings? It got small. How many of you are average? How many of you are awful at loving your siblings? All right. You know, one of the things that Jesus teaches us, he says, make sure you love your neighbor, right? So let's talk about our neighbors. Let's just talk about our physical neighbors for a second. The people who live close to you, like within 100 yards of you or so. How well do you love your physical neighbors? How many of you are awesome? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? Okay? Neighbor might mean a little something different in our world. You probably spend more time with your coworkers than you actually do with your physical neighbors. So I'm curious, when you think about the people who work with you every day and how they receive your love, how many of you are awesome at loving your coworkers? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? Okay? When Jesus taught us to love our neighbor, it was actually in a story in response to when someone was facing a need. So now I'm just kind of curious, when you see a need, when it comes across your path, whenever that is, how many of you are awesome at loving when you see a need? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? Okay? One more. Jesus, of course, teaches us to love our enemies. Our enemies. The people you don't like and don't like you. How many of you are awesome at loving your enemies? How many of you are average? How many of you are awful? Good. Maybe I need to turn this into a 10-week series instead of a 5-week series. You could move from awful to average. That would be improvement. You could move from average to awesome. You could move from awesome in some categories to awesome in all categories. That's the very nature of love does. And so over the next 5 weeks, in an uber practical way, I want to teach us to love well, to essentially represent God well, wherever we are. And so let me give you a couple of parameters that will fit all 5 weeks as we go, because we need to think the same way when we think about this idea of love does. So whenever you hear the phrase, the words, love does, I need you to remind yourself of a couple of things, okay? So here's the first thing. Love is not scarce. Love is not scarce. Some of you practice love as if it's scarce. And here's how that goes. You actually think about loving someone, and then you decide to withhold that love because you're not sure there's enough of it to go around. Some of you are very familiar with the ideas of abundance and scarcity and how different thinking works different ways. Let me give you a very quick example. Let's imagine you and I. Just imagine yourself with me, okay? And we're walking down the street. And as we're walking down the street, of course, we're breathing, right? And there's plenty of oxygen to go around. The idea that I'm breathing your air doesn't really matter, and you're breathing my air doesn't really matter. It's great when we're just walking down the street. Now let me create a new scenario. You and me, we're scuba diving. Just you and me. And we go down deep under the water. We each have a tank with oxygen in it. And then as we're deep under the water, my tank malfunctions. And I get your attention, something like this, to say my tank has malfunctioned. Here's my question, show of hands. How many of you share your oxygen with me? I should take a picture of this right now. You know, when there's a limited amount of something, you tend to hold it close. You tend to not give it out as freely. If you think there's scarcity, you hold on to your money, or you hold on to your time, or you might hold on to your love. But love is not scarce. This is critically important. You are free to love liberally. Why? Because God is love. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you have access to the love of God. You and I are essentially the conduit that God's love flows through, and we don't have to worry about running out. It is limitless. And so I hope that the whole orientation of your life is that you look at the world and you say, how could I be awesome at loving people? That might be because you've done one really dramatic thing that takes lots of love, or it might mean that you do small things all the time that are loving. It's just an orientation of your life to say, I'm not going to run out. Love does. Here's the other thing about love that you got to remember every time you hear love does. Love is not effortless. It's not effortless. Now, this is a really big deal because there's a storyline out there in music and television and movies that says something like this. If it's true love, it'll just flow. Love is a feeling or maybe a sentiment. And we talk about falling into love, but I don't know if you've noticed this, almost no one continues to fall into love. What happens after you fall into love, if you don't put some effort into it, is that you fall out of love. Love is not effortless. It actually takes a great deal of effort. The very orientation of love is that it's not a feeling or a sentiment, it's actually an action. It's love does. And this could not be more obvious for most of us. Whenever I perform weddings, one of my favorite parts of the ceremony is when we get to the rings. This is my wedding ring. I've been wearing it for 21 years, every single day. I always hold up the ring and I say, made in the shape of a circle, it reminds us that love does not come to an end. And made of a precious metal, it reminds us that love is not cheap. That in fact, many times, love will cost you a great deal. Do Jenny and I fight with each other? Of course we do. All couples do. this means we fight for each other also. And it's not always easy. It takes a lot of work, but it's not effortless. If you need convincing that love is not effortless, think about the most famous verse in all the scriptures. John 3:16 said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son." You should not anticipate this being painless, cost-free, effortless, like if it's true love, it'll just flow. No, 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 no. Love does, and it costs sometimes. And so when we look at these things over the next 5 weeks, remember, love's not scarce. There's plenty of it. It's also not effortless. So let me just start today then with this question. What does love do this week? Each one of the 5 weeks, I'm going to give you something that love does, and I'm going to ask you to practice it during the week. In this case, I'm going to ask you to find 3 different people this week and do what love teaches us to do this week, okay? So for this week, love says, I'm with you. I'm with you. Literally this week, I want you to watch for occasions. I'll describe them in a few minutes where you can go to someone and just you verbally actually say this to them. You say, hey, I'm with you. I'm with you. When you say I'm with you, when you are with someone, it communicates something powerful. It's your presence with them. And it says to them, you're valued. You're important. You're worth my time. You're worth investing in. That's who you are, if you can be with them. Now, again, where does this principle come from? It comes straight from the way that God loves us. In the Gospel of John, when he's describing Jesus coming into the world, this is how he says it. He says, the Word, that's Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. He came to be with us. In fact, that's the other name that Jesus is given when he's born. Emmanuel, which means God with us. And a lot of us have thought at one time or another about how powerful that is. That God didn't just stay in heaven in his ivory tower and look down on us and maybe throw us a bone from time to time. He actually came to be present, to be with us. This is a theme that you find throughout the scriptures. Actually, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, he's about to breathe his last. One of his closest friends, John, is with him at the cross, and it really matters. And he looks down and sees John, and he sees John next to his mom, Mary, and he says, John, would you be with her? Take care of my mom. Because just being present really matters. We see this happen in friendships all throughout the scriptures. I'm going to describe one to you today, actually from the Old Testament. When I did the BC series, I had to skip over way too much, so you're going to hear Old Testament stories still quite a bit. Let me set this one up for you. Some of you have heard of the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. Well, it ends up being a story about Ruth, but it starts being a story about Naomi. So there's a lady named Naomi. Her husband's name is Elimelech, and the two of them live outside of Bethlehem, the Bethlehem where Jesus would later be born. There was a famine outside of Bethlehem, and so Naomi and Elimelech needed to leave where they were. They couldn't get any food, and they went down to the region of Moab. Now, almost all throughout the Old Testament, Moab is regarded as a not too friendly place to be. It's not really where you'd go, but Moab had food, and so they made their way down to Moab. They had 2 sons. And when they got to Moab, their 2 sons married 2 girls from Moab. Their names were Orpah and Ruth. And then tragedy struck their family. Elimelech died, and the 2 boys died. And all that was left was Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. In that day, even more than our day, much more than our day, a woman who was a widow was essentially hung out to dry. She had no way to provide for herself. She was in a very difficult situation. Now, Naomi heard that there was food again back by Bethlehem, and so she was going to return to her people and hope that maybe she could make a life there. But while she's returning to her people, she says to her 2 daughters-in-law, she said, now, you're Moabites. You stay here. She said, I'm not going to provide another son that you can marry. You find a man here and marry them. And actually, at first, when she says this, both daughters-in-law resist a little bit. They said, no, we want to help you. And then the story goes like this. says, then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, we'll go back with you to your people. And she pushes back on him. She says, listen, that's not what's best for you. And she actually is able to convince Orpah to go back to be with her people. But Ruth continues to resist. And in this passage, I think we have one of the most beautiful pictures of I'm with you that's described in all the scriptures. Listen to this. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Hey, Naomi, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm not leaving your side. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. We're going to do this together. And just the idea of presence, when they didn't know what was going to unfold in their future, really mattered. And then get this. It says, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And this is what's going to happen in your life and in mine sometimes. When you go to someone and you say, hey, I'm with you, they're going to say, no, I'm fine. And it's actually the second effort to say, no, you got to know, I'm with you. Where you fight through kind of the polite resistance, and then together you can experience something. You know, one of the benefits of being the teacher of these things is that I get to start thinking about these things way before I present them to you. So it was about 10 weeks ago when we were planning this message, and I thought, well, if I'm going to ask everyone to go in their first week and find 3 people to say, I'm with you, then I should just go ahead and do that now and see how it works out. And I got to tell you, the moment I decided to put this on my radar, that I was looking for people that I could just be present with, they started popping up all over the place. Within hours, actually, of planning this message, one of our staff, I caught wind of something going on in their life. It's not someone who reports to me, it's someone in the organization a little bit, and I just decided to go to her and say, hey, I'm with you. And when I said I'm with you, I said, let's go grab ice cream. So ice cream's always good for I'm with you. I highly, highly recommend it. But when I took an hour instead of 2 minutes, the conversation, the presence, the support, it just means something different. And maybe for you, that's all it is this week. 3 people who you need to say, I'm with you, and it's ice cream. You know, one of the things Jenny and I have been convicted about, this goes back to our BC series of relationship and responsibility, is trying to pay attention to where God is calling us to responsibility to this broken world. And so a number of months ago, Jenny and I decided to go through the process of becoming licensed foster parents with DCS in Lake County. And so far, we've had about 6 kids in our home at different times, usually just short spurts so far. But it was just, to me, an expression to say, what was one of the messages of the Old Testament? God loves the orphan, the fatherless. And who more than the fatherless needs someone to say, I'm with you? So I don't know if yours is like an everyday small thing or it's something massive, but I'm asking you to think about how this week you would let the love of God flow through you. And at least 3 occasions say, I'm with you. Now, I want to be very careful about describing this because there's some things this isn't and there's some things that it is. Let me, again, just be super practical to say, what does this look like for you this week? I'm with you isn't a few things, okay? The first thing I'm with you isn't is serving from a distance, right? Some of you are kind of oriented this way. You see your neighbor needs his lawn mowed, and you just go mow his lawn. You don't ever talk to him, right? You mow his lawn. Now listen, I think that's fantastic. That is serving someone. That's loving someone. It's just not this week, because this week is about presence. It's not serving someone from a distance. It's being with them through what they're going through. Second one, this is very important. I'm with you isn't having a solution. It's not having a solution to someone else's problem. This is actually, I find, what keeps us from being with people most of the time. We see something they're going through, it's kind of difficult. We think, if I don't have the solution to their problem, then I can't engage at all. What would I say? A number of years ago, someone gave me a nugget of wisdom that has shaped my entire life. I'm going to give it to you right now. This is what he said. He said, you should kind of see everyone as a cup. And sometimes cups are full and sometimes cups are empty. They're in need. He said, and so when you engage someone else, here's what you got to remember. It is not your job to fill their cup. Most of the time it would be impossible for you to do. You can't solve their problem. You can't fill their cup. What's your job? Here's your job. Your job is to empty your cup into them. And so it's not about having the solution, be able to fix whatever's going on in someone's life. It's just saying, hey, I'll be with you and I'll give you whatever I have to help right now. I'm with you isn't putting it on them. Now, I'm going to mention a phrase to you. It's a phrase that I would guess most of you have used before. It's a phrase that I want you, the next time you think about using the phrase, that you'll decide you won't use the phrase, but it'll prompt you to do something else instead. Okay, so here's the phrase. Tell me how many of you have ever said this. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. How many of you ever used that phrase before? Right? Now, on one hand, I'm not trying to scold you for using the phrase. It shows some concern. But there is a massive problem with the phrase. You usually say it to someone at their point of need, and what you've done when you've said that phrase to them is that you actually then laid more burden on top of them and you took it off of you. Because now they're the ones who are responsible to think, well, is there something I need? And then can I really ask back? And then when I do, is that too much? That's actually not all that loving of a thing to do. But if instead of saying, hey, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know, if you just said, you know what, I'm going to be the one to stop and think. What do they need right now? How can I just go do something and provide for them or be with them? I'm not going to make them think of it and ask me. I'm just going to do it and be with them. Everything changes. So the next time you think about using that phrase, don't. But let it prompt you to say, how do I just serve them? So that's what I'm with you isn't. Let's talk for a few minutes about what I'm with you is. Okay? I'm with you is celebrating a high with someone, right? It's not always meeting someone at the point of their need. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation I have where you received some kind of honor or you received some kind of award, but then when you did, you actually felt more lonely than you ever did before because no one wants to get an honor, an award, and then go have to tell everyone else about how awesome it is. That feels like bragging. But if you see someone get an honor or an award, and then you could go celebrate with them, you high-five them, you tell them how great it is, that just says, I'm with you. At our house this summer, we've been working on expanding a deck in our backyard. We decided to do the work ourselves, and I way underestimated how much work it was going to be. So, like every evening I'm free this summer, I've been outside working on this deck, and it started to come along a little bit. One night, one of my neighbors, the guy who lives right behind me, he came over and he gave me 3 hours of help. It was awesome, right? A little while ago, get this, last Saturday I was working on the deck. I'm almost finished, like 99%. But I had a little accident. I was using a utility knife, shaping something out, and I know when you use the knife, you're supposed to work away from you. Instead, I was working toward me. I got 4 stitches in my arm right here. Utility knife right there. You know what happens when you go to the urgent care and you say, I slit my wrist? They ask you questions like, do you have hope? Are the days dark for you? No, I was building my deck and I slit my wrist. A few weeks ago, we were almost done. And on one hand, I thought, I have 2 hours of daylight. I can knock some more out. And then I see some neighbor friends of ours coming across the backyard. And they come over and they look at the deck. And I don't really think the deck looked awesome at the time, but they said it did. They said, Greg, this looks fantastic. I know you've been putting a lot of work into this. They even brought some cold ones with them. And we sat down for a couple hours, and they gave me a break. And I think that's what love does. It high-fives somebody. It celebrates something great. It stops and notices when someone's succeeding or is being awarded or honored. And you celebrate with them. So this week, when this comes across your radar, with your spouse or with your children or with a sibling or with a neighbor or with a coworker, you be the one who says, you know what? I'm with you. I'm with you. So it celebrates the highs. But of course, I'm with you also walks through the lows. And I just want you to be prompted each time this week, whenever you see a low show up in someone's life, to just give them some time, to give them some words, to give them some encouragement. About 3 weeks ago, Jenny and I got some really tough news for our life and our family. I actually kind of wish I could tell you what it is. Maybe at some point I can. It's too personal to share in this setting right now, but it was really, really tough. And we have an inner circle of friends. And that night when it was, just she and I trying to figure out what's next in the midst of this news, I texted a couple of our friends, husband and wife. And at 9 o'clock that night, they just came over to our house. They were there for about 20 minutes. They said, hey, we just want to be here and pray with you. And they did. And I think, thank God for friends like that. Thank God for friends like that who would kind of drop what they're doing and engage in what I'm doing at my point of need. They did not have the solution to our problem. There's no hope of that. But they were with us. And it really matters. So sometimes there's highs and sometimes there's lows. One of the things I'm with you could mean is just being curious about them. If you find yourself in a conversation this week, and it's not marked by a high, a celebration, or a low, a valley someone's going through, but you kind of get prompted to think, hey, maybe this is an I'm with you conversation. I really just suggest that you think of a few good questions to take the conversation to the next level. They go somewhere beyond how are the kids, and what do you do for work, and weren't the Bears great or awful? You know what most people's favorite subject to talk about is? Themselves. And for you to show some interest, some curiosity, you could say, what was the best part of your week? What was the worst part of your week? What are you proud about with your kids right now? Let them talk a little bit. Engage them. Say, I'm with you. And so Suncrest, I'm calling on our whole church to do that this week. After our Thursday night service, I got an email at 6:14 a.m. Friday morning from someone who was at the Thursday night service. And he said, I had my first I'm with you this morning. A coworker that emailed about a need. That's just the way this goes. I can promise you, because I experienced this, the moment you put it on your radar, you'll start seeing things all week long that God's placing in your path, and you think, I could do that. That could be it. I'm with you. And so if we all do this, there will be 4,000 interactions in Northwest Indiana this week where someone has an expression of love does to them. We're encouraged to do this in the book of Hebrews. Let me just leave you with this passage and then one final story. I love the way this is written. This is the Message version of the Bible. This is what the writer of Hebrews says to followers of Jesus. He says, let's see how inventive we can be in encouraging love and helping out. Not avoiding worshiping together as some do, but spurring each other on, especially as we see the big day approaching. The closer the coming of Christ gets to us, the more we should be prompted and motivated to let the love of God flow through us.